Coogs house. That Kansas game last month was so much fun. We got to do it all over again. But this time, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Coogs. If you want to join the conversation, but you don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below. Okay, if you saw the senior videos, I'm going to ask you which one got you the most emotional. That's going to be Juwan, so I'm not going to ask that. My question for you in the comments down below is, in talking about Kansas and Houston and all of those kinds of things, tell us what your favorite barbecue dish is, because that's one thing they think they do well, but I think that we do better a lot like basketball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're going to talk about this Kansas game tonight, Monday night, big Monday matchup. What went well the first time? Obviously, the finish. Some of the lineups and stuff like that. And then also what to make of even playing this game in the first place. That'll make a lot more sense later. Now, these two teams played Houston and Kansas earlier this season, and there's a fairly decent argument that Houston went into Kansas and broke them. Kansas was 14-4 going into that matchup. They'd beaten Duke in a non-conference opponent. They were poised to do well going into conference play. They were the #1 team in America for like the first 5 AP polls. Frankly, after the Houston loss, Kansas went up from 12th to 11th in the AP poll, but has since dropped out. They're 19-10. They went from 14-4 to 14-4 before Houston, 19-10 after Houston. Just tremendous wear and tear, I guess you could say, mentally and physically. Kansas is 6-8 away from falling out this season, 3-6 on the road in conference play. They got beat bad by BYU, beat by Utah. Just not looking like Kansas. And I think what's interesting is, and this may be my own Houston bias here, it all goes back to that Houston game for Kansas. Houston broke them. There are multiple points at the end of regulation and the first overtime where Kansas thought they had the game won and probably should have had the game won. They always won at home. Frankly, at that point, the last conference loss Houston had been the previous year in Fall Gallon. Just a tremendous feat by Houston, but a back-breaking, culture-testing kind of loss if you're Kansas. Again, they moved up a spot. It wasn't like the nation thought the single loss was all that big a deal for them. They moved up a spot in the AP poll, but Houston wrecked them, and they haven't looked the same since. And this Monday night game is kind of scheduled as a stinker right now. I was texting back and forth with Derek, and we couldn't coordinate on a time for a crossover for this one. We met up for the last one. Derek was like, oh yeah, this 25. This might be 20. Like he's really negative about this one, texting them back and forth. He may be just pumping my brakes up a little bit, just trying to make me feel good about things. But I think Kansas, by and large, feels ready to be done with this season and team. What's funny about that is like they had some really good, successful moments in the game that was in Kansas. A lot of great high-low looks out of them, making Hunter Dickinson a pass-first kind of guy for them in that one. And honestly, credit to their backup big guy that got to start that game, Floyd Badunga. He had like a career night against Houston. Zeke Mayo had 18 for them, and they had a really, really strong game plan going into that one. And it didn't matter. They were up 6 with about a minute to go in the regulation, up 6 with less than 30 seconds to go, less than 20 seconds to go in the first overtime. And Houston just willed their way to victory. And we questioned at the last game when these two teams played, like, is that the difference when you're building a culture versus buying it? Because Kansas has one of the highest NIL budgets in all of Division I basketball. They're spending a lot of money on that roster. They talk about it fairly openly, like this guy's this many million, this guy's that many million. And some of the Houston guys don't do very well in NIL. Shout out to Landon Gosling, shout out to Lincoln Coogs. Basketball is very competitive in that instance. They just find guys that fit the culture first and worry about the checks after. And I think that's a fairly distinct difference. You're seeing that across college basketball, right? High dollar teams are not working as well as teams that were put together by a coach that knows how to fit the jigsaw pieces together, right? Auburn, Bruce Pearl, great coach. There's a reason that's working very well. Kansas State, I love Jerome Tang. He got an expensive roster. They've had their struggles this year, right? I mean, those kinds of things seem to be happening all over the place. North Carolina, Hubert Davis, he's not Roy. Right, he's not Roy Williams, and they put an expensive roster in front of him, and it doesn't seem to matter, right? Obviously, there's exceptions. It's great to have both of those things, but it's looking like Kansas only has one, and Houston has the other. Now, this matchup did go to double overtime the first time, and it was in Fog Allen. And a year ago, when these two teams played, Houston lost the matchup in Fog Allen by double digits and came back and won the home game in the matchup by 30. And so I think people are kind of writing this off as it could be the same kind of a thing. I will say that, Houston had some struggles, some different things. They ran one offensive set in the first matchup in Kansas that worked Jawan Roberts and really kind of, fast forward a lot of other things that went well for them in that game. That first of all, they start off in the horns look, so two guards on the corners, two posts up top the key, and the point guard with the ball. They run the guards like flip-flopped opposite, running off of the high post actions, the two posts at the top of the key. We call that like an Iverson cut when you come across both in a drag formation. And if they trail too far, they get the ball to LJ Cryer, and he had a lot of space to attack downhill. Right, that's the first option. Then after the guy's cleared on the Iverson screen, post typically Tugler, sometimes Francis would drop down to low post, and then that would leave just Jawan Roberts high, and they'd come off of that in a drag type action with the ball. Miles Suzanne, typically, sometimes Malik Wilson, right, and they come off that, and then they'd have a kind of forced ball situation. If they don't hedge off the screen, then Milos or Malik kind of has downhill and can attack from there. If they do hedge off the screen, they got the ball in, quick little lob over to Jawan Roberts, who kind of became the de facto creator, a little bit of a 4-on-3 for half second. But really the deal there was he got to kind of distribute the offense after that. And Roberts really worked effectively in that. And it wasn't just his assist numbers and stuff like that. He really just kind of was a creator in that instance. Had some high lows, had some spit out for threes, had his own points out of it too, right? And he won some handoff actions at, back in the corner, same side with Cryer and stuff like that. Like he really got to be creative from that 18-foot spot. And I think that you'll see some of that in this one as well when I get into the matchups in a second. And I actually think that they're going to shift their lineups accordingly to kind of prevent that. But you used that last time. Roberts was kind of your key to unlock a lot of that. Malik had a great game, not just the shot, but had a great game. We'll talk about some of the matchups as well. On the whole here, though, Houston has to be feeling pretty good about things going into this game. Obviously, Big 12 champions after the weekend that was. You got Kansas kind of reeling a little bit. You get to see them again. You got to feel good about the way the first one went. And I think the only, I don't want to say this. The only way Houston loses Monday is if they beat themselves. But I think Kansas is a team that will absolutely open the door for that to happen if you're not prepared. And so before we get too far, I do want to talk to you a little bit about our buddies over at Roy as we talk about building a roster in NIL. Locked On Cougs fans may want to directly support Coug athletes and be a part of the journey, and now you can with Roy, the NIL app that puts fans forward. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you didn't have a clear way to directly support the players that you love. But now with Roy, you make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes that you're representing. At the University of Houston. With Roy, you can choose a player you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and get exclusive content straight from the athletes you help support. The best part is the player transfers. You get your money back. So it's a risk-free way. Support your team, school, and players and get your voice heard. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Coogs athletes the way they deserve and with transparency, trust, and real impact. It's the future of college sports. Join it now by supporting Roy and supporting your favorite Cougs. Locked on Cougs, Parker Ainsworth here talking about Houston and Kansas. And there's one key matchup here in the matchups I think is going to shift things as we get ready for playing them a second time after beating them in double overtime earlier this season and essentially breaking their year. Look, Kansas has had some lineup mix-ups throughout the season, so I'm kind of looking at what their last 3-game starting lineup has been. They could change this by Monday night and really throw me for a loop, but DeJuan Harris is their point guard. I think he'll be the LJ Cryer matchup from a size perspective. Makes the most sense. They're both about 6'1", 6'2". But also, as far as like what Cryer does well, DeJuan Harris is not like an elite scorer or their go-to scorer. He had 8 points last game in a double overtime game that he played the vast majority of. And honestly, he hit 2 threes and is not like he was like a 30% shooter from out there. He's not a sharp shooting 3-point guy either. And so I would argue that that's okay. He likes to set up their offense. It's very important what they do, DeJuan Harris is, but LJ Cryer will be okay. Keep an eye on the lane and making sure he doesn't score down around the bucket because it's kind of the only real threat you have to worry about with him. Not going to win that. I've said that, but I think that's kind of what Cryer will be in this one. Their scorer in the backcourt is Zeke Mayo. He's more like 6'4", 6'5". He's where I'm putting Milos Uzan. He had 18 points against you in the Fog Allen game. Kind of rotated defenders through him to give him different looks. I thought Uzan had the best possessions. Now, he still made shots. Zeke Mayo is Zeke Mayo, right? But I think Uzan's positional size and strength helps a lot. I also think that it, frankly, makes more sense to have Uzan there and then Cryer. And that's, I think, just from a length perspective, deterring jump shots, stuff like that. Uzan's got to stay out of foul trouble, right? And Zeke Mayo can put a guy into foul trouble. I think I trust Milos in that matchup. Kansas has been starting Rylan Griffin the last 3 games, and he's the guy that killed you from behind the arc in the first game. And I have this down as Emmanuel/Terrence as my matchup. We'll get to why I have that as a slash in a second, but I think that's your third guy. You can have a little sturdier with some length out of E-Man, or just the positional size that Terrence offers, kind of get up in Griffin's grill. In the first matchup, it was a lot of kick-out threes. Kind of took advantage of a defense focus on stopping other things, being really honest. And then he had some great, he knocked it down. He gave the lead a couple different key big buckets at Rylan Griffin in the first matchup. And this one, I think you got the length of Eman or Terrence, and you can kind of get out there and stop that kind of a thing. So I think that's the matchup I'm going to go with there. Again, it's tough. It was like one of his better games of the year. Your first time, you don't want to give that back to him, but also you're like, okay, how often does this kind of thing happen, right? So like back and forth. And now Griffin can score. I didn't mean to say like that's something he can't do, but I do think that's the kind of thing that you're hoping you don't help off of for other guys, stuff like that. KJ Adams has been back and healthy for Kansas. Folks that listen to the show for a long time know he's kind of my boy. And I love KJ. KJ's from a great family. I think he's the Jawan Roberts matchup, and hear me out. Best game of the year for KJ was Saturday versus Tech. They lost to Tech over the weekend in Fog Allen. KJ is a crazy athletic, high motor, but if he beats you shooting the ball, you just kind of let him. He's not an effective scorer out like that. I say that now. He'll have some crazy game in Houston to make me eat my own words, but he is the kind of guy that backdoor cuts, lobs, hustle plays, effort plays, motor plays. You need someone smart to kind of cut that kind of stuff out and kind of track him off the ball. I think that's why you want Roberts on him. I also think that because of where he scores most effectively, the guy covering him gets to kind of play quarterback of the defense or like free safety in the back, right? And kind of be near the rim, orchestrating what's happening, kind of organizing where the guys are. kind of thing that also plays into Jawan Roberts' hands from a size perspective. KJ is built like his father, a big fullback type guy. He's more 6'6", 6'7". I might give him 6'7", 6'8", somewhere in that range. I don't think he's going to out-muscle or size Jawan Roberts with any of that. He is super lightning quick, so you got to kind of know where he is at all times, or else you give him a half step, he's gone. But I think Roberts is good in all those areas. And so I'm trusting him on that. KJ was not healthy in the first matchup, so we don't know what Houston wanted to do with him there. But a year ago, Roberts had him as well. So I think that's where I'm going to go in that one. Hunter Dickinson gets JoJo Tugler and then Javier France when he's in. In the first game, they did a lot of doubling him in the post to force him to pass. Led to a Floyd Benega big-time game right at the other post and some high-low action. He was an effective scorer in some of their wins and some of their closer games. Hunter Dickinson has been, and he's got a lot of post moves and post scoring options in his bag. When you double him with length, you're kind of taking that away from him, making him a passer, making someone else beat you. When I was texting Derek and listening to him talk some about it on a show and texting what he meant by some stuff, Derek was saying that he thinks that there's a team you could build around Hunter Dickinson that is a winning team with him as the best player on the team. He just doesn't feel like Kansas has done it. I think that's kind of one of the reasons Houston's goal is to make him a passer as well, right? They kind of see the same kind of thing, right? Make him give the ball to his buddies and make them do the dirty work. Again, in the first game, Rylan Griffin had a big-time shooting matchup. Zeke Mayo had 18. Floyd Benega had a career high. Like, you're hoping that those kinds of things don't all repeat themselves at the same time when you're playing in Fertitta this time around, right? As far as what they pull off the bench, they've been pulling that guy, Floyd Benega, off the bench for them. He's a big-time center, and then when they play him at center, they play Dickinson at the 4. Again, he had a huge game against Houston the first time. I imagine if he comes in, you won't see him, Dickinson, and Adams on the floor at the same time. So if he's in the game, imagine you see Jawan Roberts on Dickinson and whoever's playing the center spot covering Padunga. I don't imagine you see that Dickinson and Padunga line up on the floor for long with only one Houston big out there. As much as I like seeing Houston go small, I don't think you'll see that a whole lot. I could see Houston go small with Adams out there and kind of get away with having a stronger or a longer guard covering Adams for the quickness and giving up some of the strength and whatever. AJ Storr, ineffective in a lot of Big 12 play, but had a lot of big scoring games for them in non-conference play, including games like Duke. And so, I don't want to say he can't score and then he goes off and it's like, what are you talking about? Or anything like that. I do think, though, that Houston's got good plans for how to handle Storr and kind of keep him off of his spots. He's a good isolation scorer. And so I imagine Houston just continues to kind of keep the game plan there. David Colt, their only other bench guy that's getting considerable minutes. He's a 20 points per game guy at Northern Illinois. He's only broken 10 points 5 times this year, and only 3 of those times were in conference games. I look at him as the kind of guy that, like, Houston just kind of have any of their guards covering will be fine. No one that I'm going to say scares me in that one. I think Houston wins the bench matchups, though, with Javier Francis being the rotational 6-man big kind of guy. And then and Terrence Arsenault potentially as well. You got to remember, though, that in the first game, League Wilson killed these guys with his speed. He had 18 points. We all think about like the shot that he hit, right, to send the game to double overtime in that one, like how heroic that was. But he had big shot after big shot after big shot throughout that game. A couple of mid-range pull-ups off the dribble, catch and shoot 3 in rhythm early to kind of cut the bleeding. I mean, he really was a very effective scorer and playmaker in that first matchup. And I feel like part of that was the time of year. He was playing really well that time of year. But the other part of that was definitely this matchup favors a guy with his speed. Kansas has a lot of size and strength and high basketball IQ, but you can't make up for speed. You can't teach speed. You can't coach speed, right? And I think Wilson has that in his bag in this game, and I think you'll see more of that play out in this one as well. Now, I also think there's a chance you see like very few of these guys play. And I want to talk about what I mean by that and why you're even playing this one with any full force and ferocity in a second. But first, As mentioned, the top of that show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the action from opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Join your shot at $150 back in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here. Talking about Houston and Kansas. And we do need to address the elephant in the room in this one. And that elephant is, why should Houston even play this one? Houston's got the conference regular season championship in the bag, secured that outright over the weekend. You likely win it by several games, no matter what you do on Monday and Saturday. You got Kansas on Monday night, and as much as ESPN, put that game there to be a potential regular season title game back when they set the schedules, it's not. Houston's got the regular season title in the bag, and Kansas is way far out of it. And you got several days before you head to Waco to play Baylor next Saturday. A lot of people, not necessarily me, a lot of people do value the Big 12 tournament that comes after that. So theoretically, you'd be saving legs for that. Or you could punt that as well and just be saving all your legs for whatever seed you get in March Madness. I think that thought, by and large, is a lot of people look at spreadsheets and data and not games. Talk about that in a second. But I also think that the other part of that is, like, some people don't really care what seed you get in the tournament. They care more about being healthy. And I think there's some validity to that. Houston's likely going to be the third or fourth 1 seed if they win as many games as I think they should in the next 2 weeks. They could also become a 5th or 6th overall team, which would put them at the top 2 seed-ish area. And the argument essentially is, if you fall to the 6th team, you're playing the 3 or the third 1 seed. If you're the third 1 seed, you're playing the 6th team or the, second 2 seed. You're playing a lot of the same kind of competition and the theoretical, hypothetical Elite 8 matchup anyway. Shouldn't the more important thing be to be healthy, if really you kind of jumbling up all those 2 through 6 matchups? And I really do think there's validity to that. And I get why rest is good, right? Especially after the gauntlet that is a 20-game Big 12 schedule. One way to negate that would be to kind of rest your guy for the final 2 of them, because you've got the conference championship in the bag, because 20 games in conference is just crazy. It's so crazy they're not going to do it next year, right? It's that kind of crazy. But I think there's a couple things here. One, you can't take your foot totally off the gas and just completely get out of rhythm, right? You've got a good thing going right now. You got to keep some rhythm and keep some things going. Second, you're not infallible. You have trouble with the press here and there. You go through scoring drought. You got to figure some stuff out when Milos isn't on run point guard. You got some stuff to figure out. No team in college basketball is infallible. And that includes Houston. And so you can't just completely take these couple games off. Game reps are irreplaceable. You can't just practice things in practice and expect them to work in Indianapolis or whatever in a few weeks, right? I mean, you got to actually work things out in games and kind of game situations. I also think there's something about being in game shape. We saw in last year's NCAA tournament that the second round matchup with A&M can go to crazy depths of your roster. You don't know who's going to be on first and who's going to play and who's going to get what minutes, right? So you got to have some idea of what you're doing there. All that's to say, I think you play your guys within reason for these last few regular season games in the Big 12 tournament. The only thing I think I'd asterisk that with is Emmanuel Sharp's ankle injury. If that's really bugging him, let him sit, right? We've had different parts of the year where guys are sick. If guys are feeling a little sick, let them stay home, right? Last year, like J1 was going through the conference tournament like as the like mummy man with his leg all wrapped up, his hand all taped up, whatever. Like, hey, maybe rest that kind of thing, right? Like, don't play with those nagging injuries, or if you have minute restrictions, really stick to the minute restrictions or whatever, right? But if you sit Emmanuel again on Monday night against Kansas, Terrence should get full run, and everyone on the floor should be playing full minutes. Now, am I going to be mad if you put Mercy Miller in earlier than normal? No. Does Sed Lot get to go get his run at Hunter Dickinson? Of course he should. He beat him up last year. Why not beat him up? Like, Sed did great against him, I thought, in the game that was in Fertitta last year. Why not let Sed go again, right? Am I a big fan of Cordell? Absolutely. So Cordell gets some run. Let's find that backup point guard, right? Let's do those kinds of things, right? Within reason, but I don't think you just don't play a healthy LJ Cryer. I mean, the guy's kind of climbing up all-time Big 12 player rankings. Let him go earn it. Let him go do it, right? I don't think you just don't play Miles Suzanne. I mean, he's got to work through and make sure he's orchestrating games. You don't want him to have like some rust when you get to the important games, right? We've seen what this team looks like when he's turned the ball over. You got problems. And so you want to make sure you kind of keep that rust shaken off for as long as possible. So again, I think that the Big 12 conference tournament's as important as the regular season when the Houston just won? No. Do I think that it's worth like playing on an injury? No. Do I think that you got to play and like play your guys outside of these potential nagging injuries? Yeah, you can't replicate this otherwise, right? And if that were the case, like, well, why are we playing them in the round of 64 against Timbuktu State? And then you remember like the that game a couple years ago where Northern Kentucky gave you more run than you thought in the first half, right? Like that round of 32 matchup has been hard for Houston, whether it was Auburn or A&M or whomever, right? Like these been a couple of these, right? And so I think you got to keep running through full speed to the extent that you can. Do I think you put in the subs early? Maybe a little bit. Do I think that you let guys like Emmanuel sit out with the ankle kind of stuff? Maybe he's healthier than I'm realizing. I haven't talked to Emmanuel about it or anything like that, but I think if a guy's got a nagging injury, let him sit with it, right? And I think that's about the extent of the rest you go, especially given that this week you got Monday night against Kansas. You've got a long break until going to Waco on Saturday. And if I were a gambler, I bet they don't go to Waco until Saturday because the game is so late at night, Saturday night. You can get up and take the bus over Saturday morning and be fine. So I'd imagine that's a lot of time you could sleep in your own bed. A lot of time you get to hit your own Normatec at the house, right? Like those kinds of things that I think they'll be okay with. And so while people are wondering why play at all, I think you got to continue to make sure that you don't get rusty and kind of keep that stuff shaken off, especially with like some breaks built in, because as the one seed in the conference tournament, you get a double bye. So you actually get some breaks in there as well. I get that. And I understand if someone, tweaks an ankle, it's going to feel like, oh, why are they even playing or whatever. But at some point, the point to play basketball is to win the games. And this is a program that prides themselves on playing hard and trying to win every single thing they do. I wouldn't try and play these guys in cards because I bet they find a way to win that as well. Now, we hear live post-game after the Kansas game on Monday night. So hit subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell so you know we're live, or you can check us out wherever you get your audio platform podcasts the next morning as well. Locked On Coogs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.